Hi, folks. I'm inside today because although it's a glorious day outside, it's a little bit chilly. It was quite cold when I took the dogs out this morning. It's beautiful, the sun's shining. It's glorious out there at the moment, but I thought I'd do this bit in the warm because Hayden's not been too well. Last week, Thursday, he was quite poorly. He's snuggled up on the bed there, and Scotia's watching the cat, who's appeared on the window, on the shed roof. So she's watching the cat out the window. And well, there she is. So as I say, he was poorly on Thursday. No, no particular reason. Just you know, he's he's had this ongoing issue for years ever since I've had him, and but he's okay. He's well. He was well yesterday. He was well today. But every time he has a bout, because he's older, it takes him a while to recover. But he's back to normal. But he's snuggled under the blanket. We've got the heating on. We can have the heating on for a little bit, so he's nice and warm up there. So I'm sitting down here, basically, because there's more room, because Scotia's up there watching the cat. I've got to go and sort the cat out. I've got a nice shelter that I'm about to sort out and put in the shed for her and get her sorted today. So, basically, go on to the next phase of my story. Do you know it's been really quite difficult doing this. I guess because obviously retelling it, I have to go sort of, over it. And it's kind of, I think because I'm kind of so kind of over it all, although, it seems like it only happened yesterday. It's like, I'm really struggling to do it. And it's not because it's making me feel bad. It's just, we've got to get through it. So, and there's a lot to go because, a lot's happened. And, this is only sort of age 14. And I don't want to take forever doing it, but the whole story will eventually come out, and that's what we'll do. But for now, I'm going to pick up where I left off. So I get arrested. We go to court. I'm appointed a social worker, and I then come under the care of the local authority. So, as I say, my mum stands up in court, breaks down, and says, I can't control Lucy. And to be fair, she couldn't. Like I say, when my dad died, I just kind of just lost the plot, and I hated everybody and authority and school. And although I had managed to come top of my French class in my exam in the third year at secondary school, even though I'd been ill for the exam, so I'd missed it. I'd had measles, I think. And I came top of the class. I sat my exam on my own when I went back to school, and everybody thought I'd cheated. The teachers were surprised because it was this particular teacher that I had for French that, I hated and caused so much trouble, and there were so many arguments, and I used to get thrown out of his class every time I went in there. But I actually came top of the French class, and I beat all the SWATs in the class, which, was some feat, really. And I hadn't cheated. I seriously hadn't cheated. I had, revised, and I did it, with no cheating involved. So that was really, really good for me. But that was the only real thing that I achieved at school, exam wise. I mean, I was good at English, obviously, but I didn't take any other exams that kind of showed that. But I mean, the teachers were absolutely amazed. They couldn't believe that I'd actually come top of the French class, in the exam. So that was good for me. So we the judge slaps this care order on me till I was 18, and I'm sort of coming up, I don't know, 14, 15, and he slaps this care order on me. And basically, I went home and I had to pack a bag. I can remember packing the bag actually, and then my social worker, this social worker that had been appointed to me, who actually I got on with really, really well. She was lovely. But then she left shortly afterwards, and I was appointed a new one, and I didn't get on with her at all. But this social worker came and picked me up and drove me to the same town that I'd been in the psychiatric adolescent unit. It wasn't too far actually from the unit that I'd been in. And she took me, and I was taken to this, what they call a residential care home. And the idea was that I would sort of go home every third weekend, and stay with mum, and obviously this man that she'd moved into the house. I still had my pony, although it was moved from the equitation centre, and we got grazing, which was further afield, but there was someone who was looking after the pony, and she was turned out. So that was okay. So I arrive at this place, and there's, other kids there, obviously. It was all girls. And, the staff, it was run by a couple who obviously, had been doing it for years. And it wasn't like a house. It was like, you had your separate room, separate sort of bedroom. And you had like, the eating area and the lounge area and sort of a quiet room, and then they had classrooms, obviously, because you did schooling, education, while you were there. So, and of course I didn't behave myself. I, got into loads of trouble, and they had sort of three groups there. You were either, they were what they called senior girls, who sort of went out from the home and worked during the day, and they were allowed out unsupervised, obviously, and they would come back to the home, to sleep there, but then they would go off to work during the day. You had sort of like an intermediate group who were allowed certain privileges, and then you obviously had the group that you sort of started off in, where I wasn't allowed out unsupervised. So it meant, you couldn't even go to the phone box down the road. You couldn't go to the shop. You couldn't do anything unless a member of staff accompanied you. And I remember that was the first issue that I had, because I wanted to just go out, I guess. And I was informed, no, you can't, member of staff's got to go with you, etc., the usual rules that they came out with. But And of course, I kicked off, and I think eventually, a member of staff took me out. And there was a girl who came into the home shortly after I got there, and it was great because we met up last year, and we've stayed in touch, sort of over the years, and she was great, and we got on really, really well. We also got into lots of trouble together as well. This particular care home, 6 months before I'd gone there, there was a girl who was resident there who had disappeared. And the town that the care home was in was the town where, it was a very famous case of, a couple who had, abused girls, and murdered them, and they, found numerous remains of the girls in their garden. So I'm sure all of you are aware of that case. And one of the girls who'd been in the home had gone missing. And awful. She obviously turned up. They found her remains in the garden of this couple's house of horror. There were some of the senior girls actually attended that address in the town, and they did used to frequent the address. I fortunately never. I mean, I was never allowed out. If I went out, the police were called, and I was dragged back, back to the unit. So because I was so naughty, I wasn't allowed out of the establishment. So fortunately, I never ever got taken to the said address. But it was absolutely shocking because when it all came out, I mean, I remember when I got to this residential home, the staff were talking about, this girl who got missing and how tragic it was, and they didn't know what had happened to her. I mean, I do believe that maybe a couple, if not one of the girls, was kind of working as a prostitute on the streets at night. So, the girls had to do what they had to do to survive, I guess. Not knocking them or judging them for that. But, it was horrendous when it all came out that actually this girl who'd gone missing from the residential home that I was in, only 6 months before, actually ended up, they found her, along with several others, as I say, at this address in the town. One thing I will say is that I do believe one night that a few of us actually met this said couple who had hurt all these girls. We'd actually done another runner from the home. I mean, we just used to walk out the door, and the staff would say, well, before you get to the end of the drive, we will have to notify the police because obviously you're under the care of the local authority, etc., etc. Yeah, we could, yeah, right, whatever. And we would just go off. I mean, there was one night we went off in our dressing gowns, in slippers, and hitched all the way to my hometown, which was about, 15 miles down the road. I don't know why I always went back to my hometown. I mean, I did. It was crazy because the police would immediately come and arrest us, and, we'd be carted back off to the home. And, but there was one particular night where there was 4 or 5 of us, I think, and we'd gone out, and we were on sort of like this dual carriageway bit, sort of in the town. And we were walking along this dual carriage road. It was late at night, and this car pulled up, and there was this couple, and the man actually chased us, and we had to run away. And I do believe that this couple, it was a known fact, it came out, later on, that they used to drive around looking for kids, for girls. And as I say, this poor girl ended up, being a victim later on. So I am so thankful that, I never ventured, anywhere near the said property. As I say, I was never allowed out anyway, really. But later on, much later on in my life, good few years later, I was living in another address shortly before I ended up going to prison, actually. And it was the police, and they'd come to interview me and to ask me questions about a certain girl who'd been in the residential care home that I'd known, who had made allegations about the said address in the town where all this had gone on. And they were quite severe allegations that had been made by her. And the police obviously had to come and interview those who had, been in the home at the time. So I basically, Mum was coming up and visiting me, and as I say, I was going home sort of every third weekend. We'd get the bus back home, obviously go and spend the time with my pony. I remember I had to cycle miles because she'd been moved to another location, and it was quite tiring because I had to go home and then cycle miles to go and sort her out, and then I would return to the home, and but I mean, really from the word go, I obviously was so troubled that my behaviour wasn't any better just because I'd had a care order slapped on me. I mean, Mum was still drinking. She was at home, still drinking, not getting on with this man. But the crazy thing is that she ends up marrying him. And I remember going to the wedding. And, the worst thing about it, to me and to everybody else was that, and she realised this, obviously, as soon as she'd done it, was that she lost my dad's massive RAF pension. And as a widow of a hero, an RAF officer, she lost it. As soon as she married this bloke, she lost all the money from my father. Stupid woman. I mean, I say that not in an angry way, but, if I'd had my head screwed on right, I would have said, don't do it because of, but, and as I say, I trundled along to the wedding. It was in a registry office. I mean, the whole thing was ridiculous. She didn't love him. He didn't love her. They were total opposites. I mean, he was teetotal, which was the laughable thing. He used to buy a bottle of ginger wine at Christmas and say, "Oh, it's not alcoholic." And then my mother really did his head in because she said there is alcohol in it, and he was like, "Oh no, I'm teetotal. I've been drinking ginger wine for years." Anyway, we didn't get on. We didn't see eye to eye. I mean, he tried to be nice, but there were just things about him that just, I'm like, what is she doing with him? What does she see in him? And I mean, all they did was argue. They argued all the time. And again, he wasn't violent. He wasn't like my father in that respect, but she used to wind him up. And, I remember there was one incident where she used to make, mince pies, Christmas cake and everything every year. And she'd made these beautiful mince pies, and she used to make them with the short crust pastry. And she gave him one of these mince pies, and of course he didn't like it, and he kind of left it on the plate. And so she comes out the kitchen and says, "Oh, don't you like it?" And he said, "Oh." Anyway, so she comes back out the kitchen with all the other mince pies that she's got in a tin, and throws the whole lot on the fire. And so, just to be dramatic and to make a statement. And, that was kind of, how it went. So, when I was at home, I certainly didn't sort of sit there and, I was out with the pony or, seeing my friends and just, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how I felt during those years, really. But in this home, it obviously, obviously the people who were in charge of the home, the couple, I believe were Christians. Because every single morning we had to have this little assembly thing in one of the lounges. And you got to laugh. I mean, we used to howl with laughter. And I still, I brought it up with my friend when I saw her last year when we met up, that was in there with me. And I mean, we still howl to this day. They used to put this record player on every morning with this record. And the record that we had to stand and listen to every morning was One Day at a Time by Lena Martell. The one day at a time, sweet Jesus, is all I'm asking from you. That song, you remember it. I won't, sounds like a cat wailing. But yeah, and we used to howl with laughter. We used to, and of course and it was hilarious because the couple, the guy used to chain smoke. And I mean, in those days, we smoked, they smoked, everybody smoked. So he would stand there with this cigarette and he'd be chain smoking. And we would be howling with laughter, And I mean, you'd push him so far, this bloke, and he would, get redder and redder in the face and, get out kind of thing. And we obviously had no respect for him, really, or his wife. I mean, his wife was so obesely overweight. Obviously, we used to be vile to her about her weight. But bless them, they were absolutely amazing. So we would every morning have to stand and listen to this One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus, right? Which actually is a lovely song. I mean, you can't knock it. It's a good song. So we used to think that was hilarious. And there was also, they must have been Christians because there were two police officers who used to come to the home and, they would turn up in uniform. And me and this girl, we wanted to learn to play the guitar. So these two police officers, one especially more than the other, started teaching us to play the guitar. And all the songs that he was teaching us to play were like Kumbaya, all the sort of classic old songs, really. I mean, lots of different ones, not just Christian, but a lot were Christian ones. And so me and this girl, we're learning to play guitar. Love it. There's a guitar in the home that we were allowed to use. And so I was learning to play guitar. Great, something to do. Just get my coffee's over here. There it is. Yeah. one I made earlier. So we're, as I say, we kept running away. I mean, we just kept running away. For something to do, and the police would come and arrest us, take us back. Sometimes we'd get held in the cells in the police station, for a while before we got taken back to the home, and then we get a lecture from the people who ran the home. There were other members of staff, who were all very nice. And then things started getting, bad for me, because there was a girl who arrived at the home, and she was only like 4 foot somewhere. I mean, she was tiny. But she homed in on me, and she wouldn't leave me alone. She kept harassing me and bullying me, and I don't understand it, and I can't explain it other than it was supernatural, because it was like she had some kind of power over me. It was like she, and if it had been anybody else, I would have just said, "Oh, F off," punched him in the face, walked out, job done. But I couldn't. And there was something about, she had this controlling kind of power over me. And I was terrified. And I remember saying to the other kids, and they'd say, "Well, just knock her out. Just stand up for yourself." And I was like, "But I can't. I don't know why I can't. I just can't." Anyway, she was weird. She was extremely weird. She was into all this, dark, occult type stuff. She actually did a tattoo. She gave me a tattoo with Indian ink. We weren't allowed to do that, but she did. We got in trouble afterwards. But she carved ACAB into my arm, which means all coppers are bastards. And, they're not, but that's what I had tattooed at the time, going across my arm, And she was just, every time she just had a presence about her, and I couldn't. And I remember going home, and I refused to go back on the Monday. And I said, "No, I'm not going. I can't cope with this girl. She just had this overwhelming kind of presence that was horrible, and she wouldn't leave me alone. She just harassed me all the time. There was nothing like, she didn't want a sexual relationship, although I think she thought she was gay. I don't know, but there was none of that going on. But it was just this, she was just severely weird, mentally screwed up, but also this dark kind of presence that she had with her all the time, and I just couldn't cope with it. And I remember my social worker being called because I wouldn't go back. So that obviously my mum had to call social services, and then the social worker turns up, and then they say, "Come on, I'll drive you back, and you've got to go, otherwise the police will have to come and take you." And I can remember I was screaming, and I said, "I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I will not go back." And I was telling them, that I couldn't cope with this girl, and they were saying, "Oh, well, we'll sort it out. We'll get it sorted." And I said, "Unless she leaves, I'm not going back." And that particular time, obviously, the police had to come to the house, and they're like, "Come on, you got to go," and they would drive you, and it used to be fun. They used to, sit in the back of the police car, and they'd drive you, and they were always very nice, but obviously, if you didn't go back, they had to take you back, by force. So, this went on and this went on, and I was getting in more and more trouble, and constantly being told off, and losing privileges, never allowed out, and stirring up trouble, winding the other kids up. And one day, I was talking to the deputy headmaster of this home, who again, was a Christian. And I remember I was in his office and he said to me, "Lucy, do you believe in God?" And I said, "I believe in the devil." Because I'd experienced, well, I thought all bad and evil, there would have to be a devil, and I was probably, one of his best, kids, because I behaved like the devil, or so I thought. So I can remember saying to him, "Well, I believe in the devil." And he said, "Well, have you ever considered that if you believe in the devil, then obviously there has to be a God as well on the other side?" And I kind of, shrugged it off, didn't think anything more about it. But he used to talk to me, along sort of spiritual lines like that. And as I say, listening to this song every day, and there wasn't anything else openly religious about the home. It was just obviously the people who ran it had a belief, a Christian belief, and obviously the fact that they mentioned Jesus was, obviously they were Christians. And they didn't try to, as I say, pump religion down our neck or anything like that. But they obviously, in their conversations with us, in their dealings with us, it would sort of crop up. And I think quite a lot of the staff that worked there probably were Christians. So as I say, I was getting in more and more trouble, and as I say, Mum was at home still. So I remember I decided one day that I walked into the kitchen, and I think they were making Bubble and Squeak for supper that night. And we used to have to sit down and eat at dining table and stuff. And I remember there was this huge pan of Bubble and Squeak in the kitchen, which I love actually, but I didn't for years after this episode. And there happened to be this tube of ant poison. It was Nippon ant poison on the windowsill in the kitchen. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just add it to the Bubble and Squeak. So I put this whole tube of ant poison, and there's this other girl in the kitchen. She's laughing her head off. She's going, yeah, go on. So stir it all in. And I think there was a load of saccharin stuff that I added as well. And anyway, we mashed it all up, that stuff. Anyway, supper comes round. So we sit down and they're serving up the supper. Anyway, I refuse to eat it because obviously I know what's in it. So I sit there and there's this other girl, she's tittering and laughing and she won't eat it. Anyway, the others are sort of eating it. And I mean, it must have tasted pretty disgusting with all the saccharin in it. Anyway, it all comes out while they're eating. I said, well, actually, I've poisoned it. And they're like, stop talking rubbish. Anyway, they had to take me seriously, obviously, because, they could have been, seriously hurt. So we ended up all being piled into a minibus and taken down to the local A&E at the hospital, which was, it was hilarious, really. But I mean, it wasn't, looking back. And they'd given us, we had to drink this brown stuff at the hospital, which would make us all sick. And so they give us all this stuff. We're drinking all this stuff. We get almost back to the care home and they have to stop the minibus because we're all puking on the roundabout, bringing up, they'd given us stuff to make us sick. So I got in severe trouble for that, obviously, as you can imagine. They threatened to have the police involved because obviously it was attempted poisoning, and but it was fortunately all, swept under the carpet. But as I say, my behaviour was getting worse and worse and worse, and I was, I would just walk out and say, right, I've had enough, I'm off. And, then the police would have to bring me back. And so I remember I got called into the office by the headmaster. And he calmly says to me, "Lucy, please don't make it any more difficult." He said, "But you're moving, you're going." He said, "We can't have you here any longer because you keep running away." And I said, "Well, what do you mean I'm going?" And he said, "Well, you're going to a secure lockup in London for a few weeks." And I said, "But I can't go to a secure lockup in London." And he said, "Well, sorry, it is what it is, you're going." So I go back out to the other kids and I tell them what's on. And they said, no, we'll all get up on the roof, right? We'll have a protest. They won't be able to take you because we'll all get up on the roof in the morning. So, of course, that's what we did. We were all up on the roof. Anyway, the police obviously came. I'm restrained, thrown into all the other girls were rioting and kicking off. And I'm dragged off. And I end up being taken to this secure unit in London for kids my age, but obviously, ones that they have to keep under lock and key because, they're up to no good. So I arrive at this place in London, absolutely devastated as you can imagine, and thinking, oh my God, I'm in London, So, I think I'd been there about, I don't know, probably the first day, the first night, and it was the next day. And all these girls are sitting around with the members of staff, knitting. And I'm sitting there, and this woman says, "Oh, you've got to do some knitting." And I said, "You what?" I said, "I'm not doing any knitting." And she said, "Well, you've got to, otherwise you'll be in trouble." And I said, "Well, you can stick your knitting where the sun doesn't shine." So I kick off, lose the plot, and they have to put me in solitary confinement. And they've got like this, I don't know, I suppose you call it like a padded cell. I mean, it wasn't padded, but it was soundproof. And they had like a couple of these secure rooms that they could put you in. So they throw me in this secure room. And I just broke down. I just started crying and kicking off. And I remember that a couple of members of staff came in and tried to talk to me. And they said, "Look, it's only... it's only for a few weeks." I think I had a court case coming up because I'd stolen an ashtray from a pub garden, and I had to go to court. I mean, steal an ashtray from a pub garden, but I had to go to juvenile court. And so obviously they'd sent me here to this other place. And I can remember I was crying, and they brought my food in, and I didn't want my food, and I wouldn't eat. And I was just crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And the head bloke of the last home that I'd been moved from, he came up to visit me a couple of times while I was there, and I was saying, it's not fair, why am I here? Obviously my mum couldn't come up and visit me while I was in this place in London because she could have got up there because the guy she was with had a car, but I don't think, they could be bothered to drive that far to come and see me. So I didn't get any visitors as such when I was there. So I think my mum did write to me because I remember when I was at the last care home and when I was in London for the few weeks, I remember I got letters off my mum saying, unless you change, unless you do this, we can't have you home and all this. So not looking at her own stuff that might have contributed to why I was, behaving the way I was and why I felt so lost and devastated. Um, and plus, I think she'd started to kind of try and get some help for her drinking, but she still was drinking, even though she was kind of trying to hide it, I guess. But so while I was sitting in this solitary cell, they brought the post through, and it was a letter from my eldest brother, and it was actually from his wife, actually, explaining that they'd become Christians, born again Christians. And I'm reading this letter, and included with this letter was a little copy of John's Gospel. And I remember sitting on this wooden bench in this solitary room trying to read John's Gospel. And to me, it didn't make sense. I couldn't understand what it was saying, what it meant. But, I was intrigued by, the letter from my brother's wife saying that, they were attending a certain church, and all the people had been praying for me. They knew my situation. They were all praying for me. And that, it showed that somebody was actually thinking about me in that respect. So that meant a lot to me. It did mean a lot to me. So the rest of my time in this place, they let me out of solitary, and I didn't do knitting. They kind of let me off with that one, and I just sort of, it was boring. It was very boring. Other girls with far more sort of mental issues than I had, and some who, had severe eating disorders and all sorts of issues. I didn't really make any close friends there during my time there. So the day comes, and I'm informed I'm going back to the other care home. And I'm thinking, well, great, that's absolutely great. So they take me back to the other care home, and I arrive back there, and everybody's like, oh, a couple of the girls had kind of moved on, left, gone to other places. But it was really, really strange, because when I arrived back, it was like I wasn't the person that I was when I'd left. And I remember acting really sort of shy and embarrassed, and it was almost like I'd lost this kind of big, hard exterior I can take on the world, and I was like, I felt so vulnerable, so very vulnerable, and yeah, very strange. And I got a phone call from my mum during this time saying that she'd sold my pony, which obviously didn't go down too well, but I could understand the reasons why she'd done it, because one, I wasn't there. I was obviously going through issues, and I wasn't there to be with the pony, although she's been looked after. And there was a girl who actually loved her and wanted to give her, a good home. So I got informed on a phone call by my mum that she'd sold the pony, but I also got told that, and yeah, obviously I was devastated, but I knew the girl that she was going to go to, and I did receive photographs of her, after she'd been with this girl, and she looked great, and I was just glad that she got a good home, and because obviously, I wasn't there. I wasn't there to, to really be able to look after her. So I do understand that. But she also said that the money from the sale of the pony had been put into a post office account that the bloke that she'd married had sorted out for me. But he was the signature on the account. And I never got the money. I never ever got the money because he disappeared and he was the signatory on the account. So that money probably still in there, but I can't get access to it. So that never sat right with me for years. But, it is what it is. So a couple of weeks, and I mean a couple of weeks literally after I got sent from London back to the other care home, I got called into the office again and they said, Lucy, you're going home. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was kind of taken aback. And they said, well, obviously, you're still under a care order and you'll still be under social services. You'll have meetings with social services. Obviously, they'll work with you and your mum. But I guess because my mum was trying to stop drinking, they thought it'd be better for me to actually be back at home. And also, as I say, the issues that I was having with this girl who was obviously, contributing to my mental breakdown, and the effect that she was having on me. So I went home. And I was 16, and they felt that it would be better for me to be back at home. There wasn't the violence that there'd been with my father. Obviously, that had all stopped, although my mother was still drinking. And they thought, I would be able to go home, get a job, and kind of live a relatively normal life, although I would still have the care order placed on me until I was 18, although it could be removed if a judge saw that it was fit to be removed before that. So yes, so that's the story up to 16. So and then I get my first job, or my first training, my first job, and I return home to live with my mum and obviously the guy who had now become my stepfather, who, we never saw eye to eye, and I never acknowledged him as, as anything but a friend of my mum's. He certainly wasn't a stepfather in that respect. So that was the care home that I was in. And as I say, I went home. I think it must have hit me pretty hard because I didn't have a pony when I went home. But yeah, so we'll pick it up on the next video, where I start my working life, really. So thank you very much for listening, and till the next one.